Hello, everyone. So we are here to present the challenges of real-time toxicity detection in online games. So this is a little stressful because we have a lot of content for 15 minutes, so I'll be really quick. Yep. So first up, who are we? Basically, we are a bunch of volunteers and researchers with a collaboratory against hate in Pittsburgh. We love gaming, but not the toxicity that we face in games. So in this presentation, we have a diverse group of volunteers with experience from bot detection, classification, natural language processing, social identity, and even game development experiences with big titles and influential games. So what is our talk? We are going to talk about real-time toxicity detection in online games. But why should we care? Because toxic interactions can ruin the gameplay experience for players, and then it reduces player bases. And so, first, toxicity causes players to leave the game. So back in 2016, the Division launch had great acclaim, but due to cheating like toxicity, the player base dropped sharply. And when players leave, publishers, developers, and the studios lose money because of lowered revenue streams, and that creates like financial loss. And not to mention the loss of future incomes due to the lack of players. So lastly, there may be even legal challenges. So Bungie sued a toxic player in Brazil, and allegedly toxic players sued Riot for getting banned and being labeled as toxic. So there are lawsuits from everyone. So how do we fix it? The first step to fixing a problem is to recognize that there's a problem. So there's a problem with toxicity in gaming. And so here we start by defining different toxic content types. And the first type we have is text. In traditional media, toxic text would be your classical racism, sexism, prejudices, and hate speech, and so forth. In games, we also have on top of these game-specific lexicon and even misspellings that gamers use to get over spell check. And then next we have images. Again, the classical type of images are like photos, arts, painting, and so forth. But in games, for example, like Drawful 2, the users are required to draw images for other players to guess them. And imagine the possibility that naughty players can do. Third, we have audio. So we have game-specific slangs like low chat, and no one wants to hear annoying brats talking crap, right? And then lastly, fourth, we have combinations. For example, in the game, an image and an audio, a video can be seen as a combination of an image and audio. And even when you are streaming the game, a streaming game can be seen as a selfie image, a selfie video plus a game footage video. So these combinations bring on game-specific and even game memes that become tricky to detect and adds on another dimension of complexity towards toxic detection. Now, lastly, we have behavioral toxicity. In real life, we kind of call them crimes, but in games, we call them cheating, AFK, away from keyboard, leaving, which is like not completing a match and leaving your teammate to fight against an unbalanced team-based game, or even feeding, which is intentionally throwing the game and ruining your own teammates' experience. We also have behaviors like intentional abuse of in-game abilities, like using your powers that would typically be used on the enemy's team, but then you use it on your teammate. So it's almost like a blue-on-blue situation. So what are the real-time challenges we face in detecting that? Detecting text, image, and video toxicity is in active research in the community. In fact, there are also many companies that provide these services. However, running these services are not cheap. For example, if we pull the public rate of TalkSport, one of the cheapest public plan, and we run it for all potential players of League of Legends, we discovered that it will cost Riot, which is the studio that makes League of Legends, 60% of their revenues to do so, which is insanely expensive. So certainly some smart engineering must go behind the scenes to allow these services to scale. And next, these detections are also compute heavy. So while they can run on servers and high-end PCs, they will probably struggle to run on mobile devices and low-end PCs. So what's the current way of doing things when local devices cannot support compute? We send them to the cloud. And the next problem we face, especially with text and video content, is the huge bandwidth utilization. If if we send everything up, it actually causes companies a large sum of money to send data. And then sending these data up to the cloud can result in issues. And these questions that we'll be asking are, how does the first the computational issues, how does the server store this data? How do we store them such that we can have a human in the loop in case the AI or automation fails to detect toxic content? And also, like, what if those data are illegal? What if our users are posing as adults when they're actually kids? How does COBRA come in once a human in the loop figures this out? And also about storing data. What about GDPR? Can we knowingly store and send toxic material? Are the laws different in different countries, and do we have to segregate them? And then what if some of these toxic material are highly illegal? And then even if we solve all these problems about compute resources, network utilizations, and privacy and legality, what's next? We realize that, and we need to know that human interaction is always evolving. The lingo we use today might be different from the lingo we used yesterday, and are definitely different from the lingo that we use tomorrow. And the games that are popular also changes. And with the changes in the popular games, the game-specific lingo will change as well. Therefore, the triggers and the models that we trained on yesterday's data can be outdated as quickly as today with all this evolution. So how do we build an effective tool that do all that? So now we talk about design implications for games. The first is communication. We need to understand that communication is a core functionality for some of the games. That means human interaction is required. And these communications can be in the form of all the methods that we discussed earlier, in text like chat or audio like speaking. So for example, and if we need to figure out a trade-off between muting and banning the communication from the toxic player and allowing the player to talk. For example, how do we discuss voting someone off in the game among us if we can't communicate? But how do we also ensure that that the communication in the voting part of the game is not toxic? And so what happens if we ban those chat functionality for those players? The next part with actions. Many times these core mechanics can be abused. For example, squatting or crouching is an extremely important action in many first-person shooters, but that enables teabagging, and that's shown in a screenshot on the top right. So some designers might want to give players the ability to express themselves by spraying pictures in games, and this can be abused to show abusive materials that the same game disables or heavily restricts if it were a text or a picture. And lastly, another action is spawn camping. And so to prevent that, designers can create safe zones, but those safe zones can result in even more spawn camping. Now the third part is locality. So some design choice might be toxic or illegal depending on locality. Blood is a cool, so for example, blood is a cool VFX. It looks pretty, but it blocks the view of the players when it sprays around. So in some regions, displaying blood is illegal. So developers just turn it off for the players in those regions. But turning it off means it gives an unfair advantage to the players in those regions because now they have a better view of the scene to decide which enemies to hit for. So what are some of the current practices to prevent toxicity in games? We have company directed, and this requires the backing of the company and is on company-wide decision. So usually it's made at a VP level or even higher. And this includes decisions to have anti-cheat or banning players and report tools or AI-based toxicity detection. It involves an entire product scale. And second, we have designer directed. So basically the designers and the developers and the team get together and decide how to solve that issue. So this is very ground-up approach, and it depends on the individual developers to be proactive and thoughtful in the process of game development and develop features to prevent toxicity. So it's more of a feature level based. And lastly, we have a react and iterate method. So virtually now everyone is reactive, So if something happened in the game, patch it. If someone posted it on social media, we'll take a look at it and quickly fix them. So trusting your community is not totally rotten yet, and they could also even point out things that you missed while developing the game. So with these current practices, do we actually have a best practice? No, sadly no. Why? The question to ask why is, are we actually winning the fight to effectively talk about best practices? Sadly, we also think not yet. And why are we not winning that fight? So there are a few reasons. The first is the lack of public and open source data. These data are highly guarded by individual companies. And the last openly available toxicity chat data set is actually from 6 years ago from Dota 2. It's still in the top 25, and Dota 2 is still the top 25 most played game in the world, which means that chat data would probably be outdated with the evolution of language and players game-specific chats. It has 500,000 players every day. It means there's a lot of people playing this and possibly a lot of toxicity that can go down. And lastly, it's one of the most toxic games expressed in surveys. So with the lack of public data, there is very little that academic researchers or outside researchers can do. And next, we also have fuzzy guidelines. So there's no clear policy or mandate from a legal perspective on how to act. So this results in game developers prioritizing other features over player safety, like other cool features. And then morality is decided by the developer and not the community or the governments. And last, but also importantly, there's a lack of performance tools. So current tools are expensive for even both small time and large time developers to use for toxicity detection, and therefore does not scale well for large developers with lots of players. So in conclusion, we need a call for action. So game developers, policymakers, and academia, all of us need to join forces in the sense that game developers should work to provide data and embrace tools, and policymakers set clear policy and legal boundary. And for academia to go head on in research and performance algorithms, and also utilize AI and ML models so that they can continually have policy and behavioral impact on their research. And that's our brief presentation on the challenges of toxicity in video games. There's a lot to online toxicity in video games, and we'd love to discuss it more in a journal paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynnette. I think there was a question in the chat. Let me just find it. Just for everyone, if you can put your question in the Q&A section, it's much easier for us to follow through. Okay, I found it. Question for Lynnette. What ways can we make the filtering better to help against the toxic words and usernames? Do we know more about how to make these filters better yet?
Okay, so in terms of toxic words and usernames, so while there is automatic toxic detection and automatic toxicity detection is developed by the academic research communities, I think that there should also be a human in the loop where users will report and identify new slang that is appearing. So these toxic words and usernames can be used in the AI models for subsequent filtering. And there's also cases for similar word detection where players type using misspellings and numbers and so forth. And lastly, the recent researchers are also working that we are working on uses LLMs to do some toxicity detection using words and usernames as well within a sentence. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from Samia. Could you please expand a bit more on the issue of lack of public data?
The issue of lack of public data. So So the last data set, that we actually, the last open source data set about chat games for online games it is a Dota 2 data set that is 6 years ago data set. So it's pretty outdated. It does not reflect the current toxicity, and therefore we are in our conclusion, we made a call to action that game developers and game studios should provide data because there's a lack of public data, right? So they should provide data, the latest data, or work with academic to provide them data so that they could work towards understanding toxicity and building these tools to detect toxicity at scale. And also that data set that was 6 years ago, that was released 6 years ago, it's only text-based, whereas we had expanded within this presentation that toxicity within games can consist of many modes. In specific, we talked about 4 modes: text, image, audio, and also behavioral. And within these modes, there's also a 5th mode that we talked about, a combination mode where you can have like video and audio together because you are streaming the game and so forth. So a multimodal data set is required, and a larger, expanded, updated data set is actually required to do more toxicity detection, and so which therefore will allow game developers and studios to better moderate the game.
So much. Do we have other questions? Same thing, if you have a question among the panelists, since you cannot use the Q&A section, feel free to raise your hand and ask your question, or unmute. Among the attendees, if you have a question and do not want or can type, you can also raise your hand using the Zoom thingy. You should see it in your interface. Oh, we have, Thorsten, you can just unmute and ask your question.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, actually?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so here's a question with a hint of, shall we say, loving irony to both Lynnette and Zachary, which is about solutionism. So my question basically is just, do you think that all these fancy algorithmic technological approaches towards community management in that regard might just be solutionist fantasies where we assume we can finally at some point progress, granted at some point, replace the hard work of changing a culture just by way of technology? Thank you very much.
So toxicity is always a fight between good and evil. These solutions are the good side, that we are trying to make society a better place, make it a more welcoming and inclusive place. And then the people that are writing toxicity messages will always be there. It's never ending. So yes, it's a cat and mouse game, but we have to keep evolving. And so we have to keep putting up that good fight.
I guess to add on, technology is just a tool, and it can also be used for the bad things as well as the good things. So like Lynnette said, it's a cat and mouse game, and often you find toxicity in game is actually caused by a small population, but the small population actually has a greater impact on the larger population of people who aren't actually toxic. So technology can help, but it won't be the actual solution. And I don't think we can really ever solve this, but we can make it better.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that a lot. Thanks.
Add if I can. I'm a part of the project with Lynnette. Yeah, I agree that it was kind of the question that there's a danger in just only looking at those technologies as kind of the only solution. And I think a lot of folks, when we were talking with researchers who are developing those technologies, they recognize all of the challenges. I mean, Lynnette brought up all the ways that users kind of get around even simple things like username filters and things. So I think it's never, even the technologists often say that it's like never gonna be, the be all end all solution. So it's really nice to I like that you brought up, you know, game design as other, and I think we've already heard from great talks on how that can be used in changing culture. So anyway, thank you for the question.